What's going on, guys? We are talking about the Antlia constellation, and essentially, the Antlia constellation is a very overlooked space. It's an overlooked energy, it's an overlooked constellation, and it oscillates between the zodiac signs of mid to early degrees Virgo all the way through the early degrees of Libra. 9 degrees to 3 degrees to be specific. We're going to get into that, and we're going to get into the fixed stars that align with it. But for now, we are talking about the air pump, or the um the Machina Pneumatica, as it was formerly named, which is the celestial air pump of harmony, right? So this is a very overlooked constellation. I don't really know anyone that talks about it or really goes into it very deeply. I've never heard of it or seen it, but it is a constellation that lies in the southern hemisphere along the Hydra constellation and the Argos Navis constellation, a little bit of the Aura constellation and the Crater constellation. But it is a very, it's really unique in terms of its energies. It's all about earth and air. And how I sort of see it is it's the modern equivalent of like your spirit buddies or your spirit guides essentially gassing you up, right? So they're just like, yeah, you got this, yeah, you can make this happen. And if you remember what I was talking about in my video on the Aura constellation, not Aura like the boat farming kid, but Aura, which is the altar. It is a constellation that is all about the energies of mm, abundance, optimism, opportunity, and the place for you to like um essentially be like that lucky sort of spiritually guided and divinely protected figure, except instead of it being part of that in that constellation, it is all of that, and no matter what side of the constellation you pick, right? And it's ironic though, because it's like in parts of Virgo, so it's like very specific degrees of Virgo that actually do this. And like I have my North Node in Virgo in this lifetime, and I have a lot of karmic relationships with Virgos, but we'll see. But essentially this is an opportunity for you to like I was just saying, like, 'cause it's surprising that this isn't Virgo, like it's not usually that a lucky spiritual constellation is aligned with Virgo in any capacity, which is just odd. Sorry, I'm stuck on that. But like I said, it's in the southern constellation. It like, so to make it simple, like it was created in 1752, and learn like the later Renaissance and scientific period by a lot of those people. However, it was recognized a little bit before that, which is why it had more of a Latin name. However, just was this is the modern recognition of it, and it's it's a pretty interesting star. It has a lot of energetic fervor. It has a lot of scientific resonance with it. It has a lot of alignment in terms of the kind of the time period that it was like, discovered or popularized in, which is the later part of the like scientific revolution, like post Renaissance and all that stuff. So essentially, like, that's where its spiritual vibe is pressed in. That's where its spiritual energy is pushed towards, and that's where it quote unquote gets gassed up in some way, shape, or form. But at the end of the day, it is quite surprising, right? Because it's like it has that air to it due to its discovery period, but it also has that energy of abundance and opportunity, and almost being seen as like a metaphor for spiritual breath in some way, shape, or form. Once again, if you guys like want to read about this and you like this webpage, I linked it in the description, along with the 88 constellation series that I'm doing on YouTube. I created all. Read up on it, get your vibe, see what you want, all that stuff, right? So where this constellation kind of differs is a lot of these spiritual gods at that time were sort of tied to the constellations and the planets and so on and so forth. But what's different about this one is it's not necessarily tied to any of that. It's not tied to like any legends, any like ghouls, any goblins, any titans, or anything like that. It's interesting because it was like not created, but um, I guess you could say, indexed or labeled during a time of modernity where everything wasn't so like beasts, gods, monsters, demons, abundance, and it wasn't so like black and white in terms of that energy. It was more about where, like I said, where people at the time came from and where they were at, where it's like it came from the art, it came from the Renaissance, it came from the shift to science, but it still had that energy of, mysticism, spirituality, prana, chi, life energy, right? And that like pump of where you can almost think of an air pump that was used for a fire in a fireplace, right? Of where it literally gasses you up, it gasses up that vision and it gasses up that excitement, which is a pretty perfect representation of what was going on with that, right? And like I said, it's just odd that it's like, then it was more Leo Virgo, but now it's more Virgo Libra, which is interesting. So with that being said, it's like broader energies are of like prosperity, thoughtful communication, subtle spiritual protection, which comes from the, I guess you could say, the energy of how it happened, because the energy of how a lot of this happened was like, you could see it as what I was explaining regarding the air pump and the fireplace, of where if you imagine fire as the elemental version of where it's like your excitement, your inspiration, your intuition, and being like, aha, this is it. That is the energy of fire, right? Now, where the air pump comes in, or is it may be physically represented to in your lifetime, where the gassing up of that fire or excitement comes in, you can sort of see this constellation as an opportunity of where it's like, if you have a thought, you have a process, you have something that gives you a lot of clarity and intention in your life, then that's where spirit would come in, or your spirit buddies that are tied to the mechanism of having this constellation in your chart offers you an opportunity to be gassed up in the right directions, to be gassed up in the ideas that you need, to be gassed up in the expectations of, this constellation. So when we have that and we have this in a certain space, it is, quite harmonizing through mental tension. So it's like, the reason why I wrote that is it gives you a lot of clarity and you don't have that experience of necessarily wondering what you should be doing or what you want to be doing, because this gives you a breath of, this is what you need to be doing from spirit, right? So essentially, like, that's pretty much it, right? Like, it's divine intuitive guidance that, if you were to define it as a clair, this would be clair sentience, where it's just like a feeling of just knowing. And I mean, honestly, like, the only risk to that is the common like phrase of privilege is blind to those who have it, because life is just easier for you in that area, so you have developed no appreciation through hardship for what you have. Like, honestly, like, that's really the only risk of this constellation. And I definitely see that for the specific stars in the Virgo space, which is essentially like, the top three right here. And even then, like, that's pretty minuscule. So even though it's an overlooked star, like, I can see why it's overlooked, where it just doesn't have a broad energy that is commonly experienced by most people in society. But for those who do have it, like, it's a good start to have, not gonna lie. Like, like, and trust me, I am pretty doom and gloom when it comes to astrology, and I'm not lying, of where it's just like, hey man, you got Pluto smacking you in a sign that isn't aligned with a certain house, and it's going to be difficult for you, and if you don't learn this lesson, it's gonna be rough. But yeah, I mean, that's, pretty much it. This is just a genuinely good constellation, which I'm hype on. But so some of the simpling, or I shouldn't say that, some of the simplifications of how the star aligns and the symbolism of it is, it's a lot of spiritual awakening through breath work. So if you were to be in a space where you, like, you just breathe, experience things, you gain a lot of clarity, you get to that space that the constellation essentially brings you, which is peace, focus, and clarity. And if you get to that space on your own, honestly, like you'll be right back to the vibration that you may have been looking for when you've been losing, and one that aligns you with something that is more abundant for you. Kundalini, I could see, it's really just another tool for you to get to the space of where this constellation operates to give you the gifts and guidance that you're looking for. Um, Life force circulation, that's a bit more advanced in terms of how you could utilize these things and how you could manage the energies of what it gives you, because that general like childhood excitement can be seen as like a higher vibration or a pretty useful form of that life force and that chi flowing. So it's more or less understanding the complexities of like where you want to store certain forms or variations of that inspiration or certain ideas in your body for later. And then the alchemy of air and mental transmutation is essentially the mechanism of what I all just described, of where it's like, okay, you're kind of you're off track a little bit. You're not walking on your path. You're a little unaligned. And you know that this constellation is an opportunity for you to essentially open yourself up to the influence and guidance of the constellation itself, right? So when we talk about that, the alchemy of air is more or less just you doing these previously discussed tools to get to a space and vibration of where this constellation can continue to guide you, right? So that's pretty much the vibes of the Antlia constellation. Like I said, divine guidance through essentially getting gassed up through inspiration and mental focus. Um, yes, pretty much follow the excitement of your ideas and whatnot. Now, in terms of the stars, let me get back to them. I got distracted. All right, now in terms of these stars, right? So, the list of stars that we have here, there's only 4 stars in the constellation. There's some more that are unlisted. However, this set of stars, it's a span of about 24 degrees in the actual space. It starts in essentially 9 degrees and 46 minutes of Virgo, and it goes all the way to 3 degrees and 26 minutes. So it's more like 23 degrees and 40 minutes that it spans, but those ebb and flow a little bit based off of the transit of the fixed stars, right? They don't exactly all move in unison, however, it is indeed close. Now, the span currently is, like I said, Virgo through Libra. So it is the cusp of beauty, which is a pretty good opportunity for a lot of people to experience, be open to, so on and so forth. In terms of specific stars, we can start on what I believe is Omega Antlia, um, which is, let me double check where it is. So this picture is AI generated, so these stars are not accurate. Um, the Omega, which is this one, I could be wrong in the Greek lettering, don't quote me on it, but it is actually up here on the top of the pump. So this star, which is in 9 degrees and 14 minutes or 46 minutes of Virgo, it is, it's useful, it's powerful, it's the activator of harmony, as you can see here. So it's through a lot of sound, air-based healing modalities, and as you can see, it's actually up here in the star. So it's like the action of pressing the pump. So it's having that intuitive guidance and almost like prelude energies, if that makes any sense, to something that is going to be inspirational and experienced in that way, right? So when we talk about that and we think about that and we look at the actual degree of Virgo, it's in 9 degrees and 46 minutes. So it's in the first decan of Virgo. It's the later part of the first decan. It's almost a third of the way through. However, that aspect of Virgo is the planner, right? It's the one that plants the seeds. It's the one that presses things, right? So what they have the gift of is they have the gift of essentially seeing inspiration before it strikes and planning all around that, right? Now, the risk of that is you can get somebody ahead of what's going on. You can get somebody ahead of what they're experiencing. you can kind of like plan too far before they even had the inspiration and the proper vision themselves, right? So when it comes to that, a lot of these people have to learn restraint for their inspiration, right? Because they have that divine influence of essentially seeing the experience or how something could go, and almost blocking it by projecting the plan before the inspiration even strikes, right? So that's really the only issue of where it's um like I wouldn't necessarily say they're a dream killer, but it's definitely a dream deterrent, if not deferrer. So it's sort of like that earth and that practical energy that strikes from the air pump is a, how could you say it? Like it could essentially like bury and douse the vibes like before they even hit, you know? So it's like that's something that they don't understand and have to learn. But other than that, they are a phenomenal like support role and support figure for like all that stuff to happen. They just need to learn how to avoid everything I just described, and the rest will fall into place. Now, moving on to, I believe this is like Epsilon Antli. So Epsilon Antli, one second. So this star, it's kind of off to the side on the right side of the actual constellation. Because some of these are surprisingly accurate. Like this is like actually where it is on the constellation. But the basic vibe of this star is that it enhances internal balance, discernment, and understanding of esoteric systems. And this star is in 11 degrees and 25 minutes of Virgo. It creates a pretty unique opportunity of being on the righteous side. So it's like when we talk about spiritual right, which is how I break down a lot of the influences of these stars. Spiritual right, like I said, it enhances balance because it understands where guidance is gifted, and it knows like what to do when, right? So it's like, yeah, it enhances internal balance, yeah, it offers discernment, and it understands a lot of esoteric systems, but how that specifically looks is it knows when spirit is guiding it. It knows when its guides are around. Maybe not like clairvoyantly, but definitely clairsentiently, like I mentioned. So when we talk about this star and we talk about this energy, it is unique in its understanding of when to push and pull, right? Of when to go. They just always seem to know what to do when, right? And if we break down the numerology of this degree at this specific time in the year of 2025, the 11, the gates, the master builder of emotion, and the 2 and the 5, which is the relationship between excitement and leads to the number 7 of intelligence, which is the all knowing energy of just like when to build through the emotional push, right? So, how this kind of like, to sum it up in a sense, how they have discernment is they are just gifted with the natural knowing of like, okay, here, this is the time to make this happen. This is the time to push. I have this feeling. I developed this specific like routine pattern and metric of when I am being guided and when I am not, and what feels like good or bad, right? Naturally they may go through something of like, I only listen when spirit tells me, and then they'll go back and eventually mature and be like, okay, well, right now before they actually guide me, like as long as they don't make me feel bad about something, I can pretty much fuck off and do whatever I want, right? Like it's like having busy work or free time or recess or something along those lines, right? Naturally, like, you should be careful with that understanding, because a lot of those mechanisms and societal expectations and guidelines of how to live are currently being disintegrated in our current alignments of Saturn and Aries, Uranus and Gemini, Pluto and Aquarius, right? So it's all going to be like online learning, specific skill focused, right? Of where it's like more people are gravitating towards the online entrepreneur vibe, which is essentially, being guided to monetize your skills rather than creating a specific outline for a predefined skill set, right? So essentially, like back to the star, Epsilon Antli, is all about the righteous understanding of when they're being guided by their spirit guides and when they're not. And they have a natural connection to that, and they know the feeling of discernment when like they feel that excitement to be guided when things are good. Now, moving on to the next star, which is going to be, I'm not exactly sure what Greek letter this is, but this one right here, not alpha, but I don't know, maybe correct me in the comments. So, this star, it is at 12 degrees and 52 minutes of Virgo in the year 2025. It says it's here, which is fairly close. However, it is actually represented to be here in the bottom left corner. Based off the actual mechanics of the pump and where it's described, it doesn't make that huge of a difference in terms of its vibration. But with that being said, essentially its vibes is it gives a lot of spiritual direction. It gives healing through how it kind of speaks and its manipulation of air. Obviously, it has gifts in breath work, but its essential vibe is of just direction, right? It's on the left side of the pump, right? So from the spiritual side, from the constellation side, it's on the right side, right? So it understands what it's doing. But when we talk about spiritual left, from our world, it is unknown, right? So it is essentially in a natural space of where it can facilitate that unknown gift, that unknown push, that unknown guidance of where it can properly be experienced and always hold space for divine guidance, right? So, unlike Omega and Epsilon Antliae, where they're on different sides of the inspiration metric, where one's like pre inspiration, one is, in proper view of the inspiration. This I don't know the Greek letter, but for lack of a better term, we'll call it Alpha Antliae. It does not know when and it does not know how. However, it knows that the energy is coming and it knows the energy itself rather than the mechanisms around it, right? So it's kind of like it just perpetually lives in a state of holding space for whenever that energy comes because it knows the energy, it knows what it feels, it knows its purpose, right? So it's more on the spiritual side. It's probably one of the most spiritual degrees of Virgo, if not like, top three. So, which, like it isn't saying much. There's only 30 degrees of every sign, but it's still up there, right? So it does have that spiritual energy of Virgo behind it where it holds an opportunity to just be inspired. It holds an opportunity to be focused. It holds an opportunity to be open. And it holds an opportunity to be, gifted the abundance and vibration that it desires and deserves and loves to be guided by. So moving on to the next star, which is like, we'll call it IJL, Greek letter or something, Antliae. This one was kind of hard to pinpoint in terms of where it is. From what I saw, it's sort of above the Epsilon Antliae. However, it wasn't exactly clear. Like it is kind of up here, kind of not. Like it's in this vicinity. Sorry, whatchamacallit. There we go. Sorry, my mouse is lagging. But yeah, it's in this vicinity. However, if it's specifically there, maybe not. But does it matter? Not really. So essentially, its vibes is it assists in diplomacy, peaceful resolution, and mental clarity. This comes from it being the first star that is actually in Libra and the only star that's in Libra. It's in 3 degrees and 26 minutes of Libra in that space, so it's like out of the cusp range. It's sorry. It's another one that's kind of like divinely guided, where it like knows where to move and it knows how to be and it knows where to push itself like in terms of how and when it actually shows up and decides to assist in some way, shape, or form. So, unlike most Libras with the Libra energy, of where they have this like internal need that, it's like Libras be pursuing balance, but where they mess up is there's always strings attached with Libra energy. Like they're always doing it for karma. They're always doing it because they feel like they need to be the ones that actually create that balance for people. They feel like they need to be the ones to do X, Y, Z, you know? So there's that subtle string attached element to it. And it is like, it's there, but when it comes to people who have it in this specific degree, they have a bit more reverence for where they're being pushed and when they provide balance to people, because it's sort of like they don't necessarily go after a certain dynamic or a certain experience or a certain vibration unless guided to, right? Because they'll learn that if they don't do it when they're guided and they don't do it, things go a little awry, things go a little left, things go a little like they just sort of feel like it was like time wasted. So when it comes to being pushed towards an experience or being pushed towards that clarity, they have a different perspective on where and when to push it, unlike Libras typically do, right? So it's sort of like having the star is sort of like all the benefits of Libra without any of the karmic debt or guilt or downside in some way, shape, or form, because they learn kind of young that it doesn't work, bites them in the ass, and that they need to move on, you know? But when they're pushed in the right direction, hey, more power to them. But that's the vibes of the Antlia constellation. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. I think the next one I'm recording is Apis, and then I'm back to what I consider the cool constellations like Aruga, and then it's going to be Boots, and I'm hyped now.